Hello, hello, hello. This is Jennifer McGuire, and I'm so glad you're here. Now, today I have a fun technique for you that uses basic supplies, and I call this technique Trapped Resist. I have a couple examples for you, and then after I share the technique, I will also share my favorites from a new Simon Says stamp release, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. But first, let's focus on the cards sharing this trapped inking technique. This technique can be done with pretty much any inks and any stamps, and it's great for creating colorful backgrounds. This first card was really fun to make and could be used for many occasions. For the background, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Magic Stars background stamp. This is a fun one because it can be used for any kind of celebration card. I will be doing my stamping on just basic white cardstock. I'll link to the one that I use below, but any white cardstock should work well. Now, as I have this stamp in my stamping tool, I'm putting some tape over some of the stars. Now, note that the sticky part of this tape is facing up towards the camera. So I'm laying it upside down to cover up some of the stars. Once I'm happy with a few of those stars covered up, you could do more if you wanted to, I'll close my stamping tool upside down, flip it over, and now the tape is transferred onto the cardstock. This will allow the stars that line up with that tape to not get inked. You'll see in a moment. Now I'm using Tim Holtz Distress Oxide ink to ink up some of the stars with squeezed lemonade. I like to smooth out the edge of the inking that I put directly on the stamps with a blending tool. That just keeps it from having harsh edges. So this will stamp some of the stars in a yellow color. It's kind of hard to see in the video. Then I will ink up some of the other stars with wild honey. This is more of an orange color. So it's okay if it overlaps with what you've done. It doesn't matter at all. And then you can use a blending tool to kind of smooth out the edges of the area that you inked. You don't need to use a blending tool, but when I use multiple ink colors on one stamp, I find blending the edge of your inking helps to give a smoother result. Now you could use absolutely any inks you want here. I'm using Oxides because they're beautiful and I have them out anyways to do the blending we'll do later. But you could use dye ink, pigment ink, anything here. There are still some stars that I haven't inked up yet, so I'm using an inking tool and tumbled glass ink to ink up those stars. By using the blending tool, I can get into those smaller areas in the middle. Once I'm done stamping with all the different colors, I'm going to clean my stamp very well. So I used a wet cloth and then a dry cloth to clean it off. I will then remove the pieces of tape so that we have that white cardstock exposed in those areas. I will then use an anti-static powder tool over this whole surface. We're going to add clear embossing on top of this. That's the key to this trapped inking technique. So I'm using my anti-static powder tool, then I will ink up my stamp with Versamark ink, and then I'll stamp it again. I'll repeat that twice just to make sure that I have a lot of Versamark ink on my cardstock because my ink pad's getting a little bit dry. Once I've stamped it twice, I will then remove my cardstock and add clear embossing powder. Any clear embossing powder will work. I'm using Hero Art's Ultra Fine Clear. So what's happening is after we heat set this, the color that we stamped with first will be trapped under the clear embossing. So you'll see there's yellow, orange, and blue, and then some white stars. Because remember how we used the tape to mask off some of the stars? Those ended up not having any ink under it, just clear embossing on top. So all that's trapped under those clear embossed stars is white. Next, I have my Waffle Flower Watercolor Media Mat. That's my favorite thing to blend ink on. I also have my Gina blending brushes. Any inking tool would work. And I have Distress Oxide ink that I've put into my ink stand. The ink stand holds the ink pad as you ink it up, so you don't have it moving everywhere and it keeps everything clean. I am applying Broken China Distress Oxide ink generously in a few areas over my background. You could use any pigment, dye, or oxide ink here. You could use traditional distress ink, you could use dye ink, you could use pigment ink, you can use oxide ink. You could use hybrid inks here. Pretty much anything would work. The reason I chose oxide is they're the easiest to blend, and you can layer colors on top of each other and still see them a bit. So first I did tumbled glass, and then I added some prize ribbon. Now I'm adding some seedless preserves on top of the prized ribbon. If you used other inks, it wouldn't work as well as with the oxide inks to layer those colors. Now I'm putting a soft amount of prize ribbon over all the color to kind of smooth it out and blend it. And look at that beautiful night sky background. But wait, watch as I take a dry cloth over it and rub off the excess ink, those stars pop. What had happened is the ink was sitting on top of our clear embossing, but the clear embossing resisted that ink. So you can use a dry cloth to wipe it off the embossing, and those colors that we stamped underneath the embossing pop. So here are some other examples I did with the same technique. Basically, we trapped the orange, yellow, and light blue underneath the clear embossing. Then we could put any ink we wanted on top and it would still show through. Such a fun technique. If you have lots of colors of colorful embossing powder, you could definitely just do that instead, but most of us don't have many. But we have lots of colors of other inks that we can do clear embossing trapped resist over. So we have this colorful background with those bright stars against the dark background. Now it's time to add a sentiment and a little mini scene over it. For this, I used a few new Simon Says stamp products that I am just really excited about. This is the Simon Says Stamp Magical to Me stamp set. Look closely at the sentiments. This can be used for general encouragement cards. This can be used for thank you, birthday, anniversary, pretty much almost every occasion you can imagine around the word magical. And there are 3 magical style words that you can use in coordinating dies that can cut them out. Also, there is the Simon Says Stamp Magical Word Die that's separate, and it has the word magical and then the shadow to go with it. I'll be using both of those. And I plan to be using these in a lot of upcoming videos because it can be used for many different types of cards. I'll also be using the Simon Says Stamp Night Sky die set. That has the moon, the clouds, the stars, and so on, and that will be a great backdrop for a card. And the magical stars, which is over on the right, which creates a cluster of stars of different sizes, which is always fun because you can use these stars as accents on your cards. Let's start with the word magical itself. A lot of people ask how I stack die cuts, so I thought I'd show it. I die cut the word magical twice from white cardstock, put some glue in between, and then I kind of just press around all the way across the word until the words are lined up. Then I put liquid adhesive on the 3rd layer. In this case, it's the top layer, which is the gold glitter cardstock. I put adhesive on the back of that, pop it on top, start on one end, and just work my way across the word, kind of moving it until it's lined up perfectly. Then I just have the little dot to add on the top of the word magical, and I use my Trinity Stamps pickup stick to add that. Then I put adhesive on the back of that and add it to the white cardstock shadow die cut that I created from the same die set. So the die set has the word magical and the shadow. You could definitely skip stacking your die cuts, but I think it's worth doing because that dimension really makes your card stand out. Okay, next I'm trimming down our background to be 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I can save these extra pieces for an additional card. Okay, so I did die cut a moon from that night sky die set that I showed you earlier, and I die cut it twice from white cardstock and once from holographic cardstock, and added it to my card. Here I have the magical word that we created before. I'm putting some foam tape to the left back of the die cut and regular liquid adhesive to the back right of the die cut so it can overlap our moon. I love all that dimension that we're adding to this, but if you wanted to keep it smooth, you could skip the stacking. Now it's time to add You Are Simply above it and also those vellum clouds in the background. I stamped You Are Simply onto a white cardstock strip and also have 2 additional white cardstock strips behind it for dimension. After I put it in place, I peeled off this stamp strip on the top. It's still wet, so it was easy to do. So watch, I'll peel that off, and then I can tuck our little vellum cloud in between. So when I have vellum die cuts, I like to hide the adhesive. There are adhesives that are supposedly clear to vellum, but I don't find any of them to work as well as hiding the adhesive. So in this case, I'm sandwiching it between those cardstock strips, and that will hold it in place. I then, for this one here, I'll trim it down to make it a different shape cloud. I will put the adhesive for this underneath the letter M, so no one will ever see that, and that will hide the adhesive for this cloud. So usually when I add any kind of vellum to my card, I just hide the adhesive. Now this one I want floating down here. So I use a little dot of strong liquid adhesive, that's Gina K Connect. Then I will cover up that dot of adhesive with a little star die cut. You could use little gemstones, little pearls, little die cuts, anything to hide your adhesive, and that will help to hold your vellum in place. Another thing you can do for vellum is to wrap it around the back. So I had these two vellum clouds that were hanging off the card. Instead of cutting them off, I'm wrapping them around the back of our inked piece and taping them there. That will keep them from falling off the card and also keep us from showing any kind of adhesive. Then I will put liquid adhesive on the back of the entire piece and add it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. So now I can be sure all the vellum clouds will stay where they are. Using the Magic Stars die set I showed you earlier, I created a bunch of stars that I added to the card from white cardstock and gold glitter cardstock. But I wanted some additional shine, so I'm using Trinity Stamps Oh My Stars Confetti. These have a lot of shine to them, and they aren't bulky, so they're great to add to cards. If you've never tried any kind of holographic confetti, I recommend it because it's a great, inexpensive accent to your card. So here is the completed card, which is 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2. I love that it has that dark color with those bright stars shining from it, all starting with white cardstock. Then we have the gold glitter sentiment, the holographic moon, and the sparkling stars in the background. We were able to create that background using basic supplies. It looks like we stamped or heat embossed with colorful inks on top of a blue cardstock, but really we started with white cardstock, used basic inks, and clear embossing. I'll show a few more examples of this in this video and the next. Now at this point, I noticed that we have the Simon Says Stamp Sky Builder stencil, and it would have been fun to use the clouds of the stencil on this card. So instead of trying to work it in, now that the card is completed, I did a second card. And I have a really helpful tip to share with you on this. Remember earlier I created 3 backgrounds the same, the star backgrounds? I'm using one of those for this. So this background here was created just like I showed you on the last example. However, I'm using the stencil to ink some clouds on top. I want these clouds to be very subtle. So I am adding some white pigment ink on top. Now I'm pressing my white pigment ink directly onto my glass work surface and then picking it up with a blending tool. The reason I do this is the blending tool might pick up a bit of the blue ink from the background, and I don't want that to go onto my white ink pad. So by putting the ink onto my glass work surface, I don't have to worry about that. Now you could put a heavier amount of white ink on if you want your clouds to stand out a bit more, or you could put white embossing powder on top if you want them to be solid. I wanted them to be super soft and subtle on this background, kind of like if I did vellum die cuts. So I kept moving the stencil around and adding more clouds, and you can see them on here. Very subtle. Again, you could do more white ink or white embossing powder if you want it to stand out more. But look how pretty and soft that background is. Okay, now I wanted to add this Shoot for the Stars die cut sentiment that's new from Simon Says Stamp. I die cut that 3 times and glued it together for dimension. But when I put it on the background, it kind of got lost in the background. So I'm adding some Chipped Sapphire Distress ink just in the center to make a darker spot. But that didn't seem to be enough for me. I still felt like it needed to be darker in the center in order for that white die cut to stand out. So I've moved on to Black Soot, which is the darkest, blackest color of distress ink, and I did that towards the center. But remember to use your dry cloth to wipe off the excess ink so your stars still stand out. Even with dark ink over that background, you can wipe those stars clean and have that bright color show through. So that's the idea of this technique. You're trapping color under your clear embossing so you can put any inks or paints or anything you want on top, and that clear embossing will resist that color and still show through. Now I thought it'd be fun to have a holographic cardstock mat for this piece, so a little bit of shine would show around the edge. However, that's a big piece of holographic cardstock to go to waste. I don't want to waste all that. So I'm going to die cut from the center, and no one will ever know I did. Here I die cut a bunch of stars that I can save for a later project. You could also die cut a little more from this piece if you wanted to. And now I can glue my blue inked piece on top of this. No one will ever know that we die cut from the area behind it, and that keeps it from going to waste. So now I can glue this down and we'll have that holographic matte around the outside edge, which really catches the light nicely and makes this card extra shiny. Now I will glue that piece onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. I finished off this card by adding some white die cuts from the Magical Stars die set, and I stacked those up 3 thick so they would stand out nice and tall. I also added a few of the Trinity Stamps Oh My Stars holographic confetti. So you can see when I tilt this in the light, it's a little sparkly. That's thanks to the confetti and the holographic cardstock around the outside edge. So as you can see with these first 2 examples, background stamps are great for this trapped inking technique. However, I wanted to show you that individual images are good for this too. In this case, I'm creating this silhouette of color and then putting some ink on top. So this is a little variation, and I'm going to show you a tip for multi-inking that allows you to create a gradient. This is the Simon Says Stamp Silhouette Sentiment Stamp Set. This is a beautiful one because it has the silhouette image, but also lots of sentiments and mini sentiments. The coordinating die set for this allows you to cut out those main sentiments, which I'm always a big fan of. You can see them here. But then there's also mini sentiments that can go beneath it or on the inside of the card. Let's start with the large floral image and white cardstock. Now I've never used this image before, so I wipe it clean first so it'll be ready to take ink. Now I'm inking up the bottom of the stamp in 2 ways. One is directly to take the ink pad to the stamp. Another way is to use my blending brush to apply ink to the stamp and then transfer that to the paper. That gives you a very smooth edge and kind of controls the amount of ink you're putting down. So here I'm trying to put a lot of green ink towards the bottom and then kind of fade it towards the top of the image. Here I'm using a blending brush and Gina K Wild Dandelion ink, which is a bright yellow, and I'm applying the ink to the stamp using the blending brush. When you do this, you have to do it a few times to make it dark enough, but it's a great way to control the color and get a beautiful blend with your stamped image. Here I'm adding Hero Art's Bubblegum ink and putting a little pink towards the top. So after I've done this a few times, I end up with a really beautiful blend of color, green to yellow to orange to pink. So if you're looking to create a beautiful multicolor image with a nice blend between, try using any of your inking tools. I love using the Gina K blending brushes. Now it's time to trap this color on that white cardstock. I'm using my anti-static powder tool. I've cleaned my stamp. Now I will ink the stamp with Versamark Ink and stamp it right on top of what we've already stamped. After I've stamped that a couple times to make sure I really have a lot of Versamark ink on top of it, I will add clear embossing powder. This will trap that green, yellow, and pink underneath the powder so that we can put any color we want on top to create a bold background. That's the fun thing about this trapped inking technique. And once again, you could do any ink for that color underneath the clear embossing powder. Now let's add some color on top. I first started with a little bit of broken china towards the bottom, and then I put a bit of tumbled glass towards the top. This is Oxide ink. You could use regular distress ink or any dye ink or any pigment ink here. I chose Oxide inks because they blend effortlessly. Now after I did that, I decided I wanted it to be a bit darker. So I'm coming in with that new prize ribbon that's beautiful and putting that towards the bottom. Every once in a while, I'll stop and wipe it with a dry cloth just to make the color pop back out. And then I'll continue to add more color. So I tried to make this a little bit darker towards the bottom and softer towards the top. When I'm done, I use that dry cloth again to wipe the excess ink off of the clear embossing and our image pops. Now this card will end up being a mini slimline card, which is about 3 1/4 inches by 6 1/4 inches. Notice I have a mat for our inked piece, and that mat is white with faux stitching. Now for that, I use the new Gina K Designs Master Layout 7 die set, a great one for mini slimline cards. There's a rectangle with faux stitching and another rectangle that cuts a thin mat for that. There's also this smaller rectangle combo and these dies for creating a little label. I'm using the rectangle with the faux stitching on the inside edge. It takes the guesswork out of what size to cut for a mini slimline card. I cut 3 white rectangles with the faux stitching on the inside edge. I'm gluing those together, and that will be a mat for our colored piece, and it has dimension to it. So I trimmed down our colored piece and added it to the center of that. And now I'm trimming some of the excess off the top. This will get mounted to the top of my mini Slimline card. Kind of looks like a tag sticking up there from the top of the card. Now for sentiment, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Hibiscus Bloom stamp set. This is a beautiful one with gorgeous sentiments and sentiments that work on the inside of cards. Once again, there is a coordinating die set available that will cut out the large sentiments. I think this is really helpful when adding it to a card, and I'll be doing so today. So I stamped with black ink the Caring Thoughts on white cardstock and used the coordinating die to cut it out. Now I am gluing that right onto our card at the base of those little flowers, and it gives it a nice little finished look there. I also stamped a little sentiment underneath Caring Thoughts, and now I'm adding some little white butterflies on top of our background. I love dies that cut little butterflies, little hearts, little stars, little circles that you can use as accents. In this case, I glued 2 white die cuts together and then 1 black glossy die cut on top. That way there's some dimension, and those little butterflies will stand out against our colorful background. I thought the pop of black on those little butterflies tied together nicely with the sentiment to make it stand out more. Okay, so here's our completed card. It's about 3 1/4 by 6 1/4 inches, and you can get a mini Slimline envelope to hold it. There you can see our bright color that's trapped behind our clear embossing, and then we have the even brighter blue sky around that. That's the great thing about using the trapped inking technique. I then have my sentiments and the butterflies, and it's a pretty quick card to pull together. This shows that really any stamp that has a bit of solid area to it, whether it's a background or individual stamp, will work for this trapped inking technique. Now before we go, I wanted to give you a look at some of my favorites from this newest Simon Says Stamp release. It's a big one, which I know can be overwhelming when you look at it, so I thought I'd show you some of my other favorites in addition to the ones I've already used. I will be using all of these products again in a video coming out in a couple days. All right, let's start with a must-have stamp set. This is the Simon Says Stamp All About You set. I really like the style of these sentiments. They're bold, but not too big, and work for a lot of different occasions. I will be using this stamp in my next video, as I mentioned, and it'll show you how it stands out against a colorful background. I will also be using the new Simon Says Stamp Slimline Floral Border. I really love this stencil. It's inexpensive and can be used for a lot of different size cards. In fact, it's big enough for an 8.5 inch wide card, which is a typical Slimline card. Lots of different techniques and different products you can use with it, but in my next video, I'll be showing how to do a trapped inking technique with a stencil. And there you can see the thank you from the All About You stamp set. Another product I really like from this release is the new Simon Says Stamp Layering Leaves Stencil set. There's only 2 stencils to this, but when you ink it up, it looks really amazing, and you can use it in many different ways, and you can add little embellishments to it to really make it pop. Now I use it in my next video again, just giving you a few sneak peeks, and here you can see it used with just some teal ink and some green ink. Beautiful, colorful background. Also, I'll be using the Simon Says Stamp Wish I Could Hug You die set. It cuts the words Wish I Could Hug You and a shadow for it. And it's a nice size that fills the center of a card, allowing you to make cards very quickly and simply. Again, this is just a little peek into my next video. And the final card that I'm showing as a peek is this You're the Best card. That die set will definitely be on my favorites list for this year. There is a shadow die and then the words for You're the Best. And I used white cardstock and black glossy cardstock to really make it stand out against a bold background. I like dies like this that really are the focal point and have some interest to them. I also really like the Simon Says Stamp Mountainscapes background stamp. Although I haven't used it yet, I look forward to using it as a subtle backdrop to a little scene on my card. I like scene cards, but I struggle with them. So background stamps like this make it really easy. I can just add some little critters to the front along with the sentiment and I'm good to go. I also really like the new Simon Says Stamp Small Script 2 die set. This has 4 small script dies in it. You have Miss, Hey, Love, and You. So you can do Miss You, Love You, and Hey You, or any combination of them. These are a nice small size that are easy to add to any card. I use the original small script die set from Simon Says Stamp a lot in my videos. And then finally, I recommend the Simon Says Stamp Geometric Builder Hearts dies that you see on the left. And then also the Simon Says Stamp Sexy Hexie die set on the right. Now the reason I like these die sets is it's a great way to use up your colorful scraps. You can die cut a bunch of pieces and assemble them and create a pattern on the back of your note card. And then you can add any sentiment you want to them. I like cards like that because they're kind of mindless to put together, but you end up with something really colorful and special, and you can use up your scraps at the same time. I especially like that heart set. These hearts can also be used as accents on cards. You can use the little outline hearts or the small hearts. So it's a great value for all the ways you can use them. All right, so there's a look at the newest Simon Says Stamp products and a fun trapped inking technique with stamping. Stay tuned for my next video, which will come out in a couple days, which will show a variation of this technique, but using stencils. Got a lot of tips in that one too. If you're interested in the products that I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description, but also check out the videos I link here in the middle. I think they might be helpful to you. And you can click up on the top right to go to my blog and bookmark any cards you may like for future reference. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again soon with more ideas.